At a gate in the city of Hebron, a man was pulled aside for what looked like a private conversation and was killed there, in the entrance of the city, by the commander of the army he had just agreed to serve. The killer was Joab. The dead man was Abner, son of Ner, and for most of the years covered by the books of Samuel, he had been the most powerful military officer in Israel, who was not himself a king. The killing is reported in 2 Samuel chapter 3. What comes after it is stranger than the killing itself. The king who stood to benefit most from Abner's death publicly cursed the killer, tore his own clothes, and walked behind the funeral bier. That king was David. He did not touch Joab for it. Not that year, not for the next several decades of his reign. The order to settle the account came only on David's deathbed, addressed to his son Solomon, more than 20 years after Abner was already in the ground. This is a record of how that gap between a public curse and a private silence got filled by a man mostly remembered, if he is remembered at all, as an obstacle David had to clear on the way to a throne. The text does not support that reading. Abner was not an obstacle. According to 1 Samuel chapter 14, he was Saul's own cousin, son of Ner, and Ner and Saul's father Kish were brothers, sons of a man named Abiel. He commanded Saul's army for the whole of Saul's reign. When the shepherd David went out to face Goliath, it was Saul who turned to Abner and asked whose son the boy was. And Abner, by his own admission in 1 Samuel 17, did not know. He appears again after that, and not flatteringly. In 1 Samuel 26, David and a companion named Abishai slipped into Saul's camp at night, passed a ring of sleeping soldiers, and stood over the king without being stopped. Saul was lying in a trench, a spear stuck in the ground near his head, a water jug beside him. David took the spear and the jug as proof and left. When he was safely at a distance, he called out to Abner by name and told him in front of the camp that he was not fit to guard his king. Abner had no answer recorded for that. The record does not explain the lapse. It only reports the accusation and Abner's silence. Saul died at Gilboa along with 3 of his sons, and the kingdom he had held together did not simply pass to whoever was strongest. It fractured. David was anointed king over the tribe of Judah at Hebron in the south. In the north, it was Abner, not any surviving son of Saul acting alone, who gathered what remained of the old regime and installed Saul's son, Ish-bosheth, as king over Gilead, Ashuri, Jezreel, Ephraim, Benjamin, and the rest of Israel. 2 Samuel states plainly that Ish-bosheth was 40 years old when this happened, and that he reigned 2 years. It also states that David reigned in Hebron for 7 years and 6 months over Judah alone. Those 2 numbers do not obviously line up across the same stretch of time, and the text never explains the difference. It simply reports both figures and moves on. What the text does make clear is who held the actual authority in the northern kingdom. Ish-bosheth is never shown giving an order that changes anything. Abner is the one who marches him to Mahanaim, the one who negotiates, and, later, the one whose anger determines whether the kingdom holds together at all. The 2 kingdoms went to war, and the opening move was formal rather than chaotic. 12 men chosen from Benjamin, 12 from David's forces, met at the pool of Gibeon for a staged combat, each man seizing his opponent by the head and striking with a blade to the side. All 24 died. 2 Samuel reports the exchange and moves directly into a larger battle that followed it, in which Abner's forces broke and ran. In the retreat, Joab's younger brother, Asahel, described in the text as swift-footed, ran down the older general alone. Abner is recorded warning him more than once to turn back and fight someone closer to his own rank instead. Asahel did not stop. Abner killed him with the butt of his spear. The text gives the warning in direct speech and the outcome in one line. It does not linger on it, and neither does this account. What it created was a debt. Joab did not forget who had killed his brother, and the record does not suggest he ever intended to. The break inside Saul's house came from an accusation, not a battle. Ish-bosheth confronted Abner over Rizpah, a concubine who had belonged to Saul, asking why Abner had taken her for himself. In the political customs recorded elsewhere in this same set of books, laying claim to a former king's concubine could function as a claim on the former king's authority. The same gesture Absalom would later make against David. The text does not say outright that this was Abner's intent. It reports only the accusation and Abner's fury at being questioned by the king he had made. His answer, recorded in 2 Samuel 3, was pointed. He asked whether he was a dog's head belonging to Judah, listed the loyalty he had shown to Saul's house, and then, in the same breath, announced he would strip that house of its kingdom and hand it to David instead. He made contact with David directly. David's price for accepting him was concrete: the return of Michal, Saul's daughter, and David's first wife, who had been given to another man during the years of separation. Abner met that condition, and the record shows David receiving him at Hebron and sending him away in peace. Joab was not present for that meeting. When he returned and learned what had happened, he confronted David about it. The text records his objection, but not David's reply. What happened next is precise about geography. Joab sent messengers after Abner and brought him back from the well of Sirah. 2 Samuel states directly that Abner was recalled while David did not know it. At the gate of Hebron, a public threshold, not a hidden corner, Joab drew Abner aside as if for private conversation and killed him there, citing the blood of his brother Asahel as the cause. The text's insistence that David had no knowledge of the recall is worth noting as exactly that. An insistence made by the same narrative that elsewhere goes to considerable lengths to clear David's name of complicity in the deaths of Saul's household. The scholar Kyle McCarter has argued that the material covering David's rise reads, throughout, like a document built to answer specific accusations against him, an apologia, responding point by point to charges. The text never states outright, but clearly assumes its audience already knew. Whether that pattern extends to the killing of Abner is not something the text settles. It is something scholars argue over. David's public response was immediate and total. He cursed Joab's line by name, asking that it never lack a man with a discharge, a man with leprosy, a man reduced to a woman's labor, a man who dies by the sword, or a man who goes hungry. He ordered mourning across the camp, tore his own clothes, and walked behind Abner's funeral bier himself. 2 Samuel records that he then declared before witnesses that he and his kingdom were innocent forever of Abner's blood. He did not remove Joab from command. Joab remained commander of David's army for decades afterward, through the revolt of Absalom and beyond. Whether that was constraint, Joab controlled troops David could not risk losing, or convenience is not something the text states. The historian Stephen Mackenzie has argued that a pattern runs through David's rise in which men who stood in his way died at politically useful moments. Other scholars, weighing the same evidence, caution that inferring guilt from benefit alone is not proof, and that the text may simply be telling the truth about David's ignorance. Both readings use the same verses. Neither can produce a document the text does not contain. Abner's death destabilized the kingdom he had built for Ish-bosheth almost immediately. Within the same narrative unit, two of Ish-bosheth's own officers, Rechab and Baanah, murdered him in his bed and carried his head to David, expecting a reward for removing David's remaining rival. David executed them instead, and had Ish-bosheth's head buried in Abner's own tomb at Hebron, the general and the king he had made, sharing one grave. Joab's reckoning did not come until David's death. On his deathbed, David told Solomon not to let Joab's gray head go down to the grave in peace, naming what Joab had done to Abner, and years later to a second commander named Amasa, killed the same way. In peacetime, David said, as if in war, staining the belt at his waist and the sandals on his feet with blood never answered for. Solomon had Joab put to death at the altar he'd fled to for sanctuary, and named Abner's blood, decades old, as one of the reasons. The text never says whether David gave that order out of grief withheld too long, or convenience finally made safe. It states the curse, the tears, and the silence that followed both, and stops there.